boasting is going to take home the World Cup trophy.
We'd love to say England.
Well, we
Of course,
have to
or
say
Scotland,
England.
or Scotland, you know.
England or Scotland.
England or Scotland would be
/ France, more like.
Here's a hot take. I think France are going to have a terrible tournament because they're overdue it. I think Germany are going to come through.
Okay.
And I think everyone's sleeping on Brazil.
I am a senior producer at ITV and I oversee all of our creative output.
Yeah, I'm also a senior producer at ITV and look after sort of digital output across the roster of sports that we have. Obviously, it's a big year for sport this year. ITV's sport's largest project is probably a little thing called the World Cup. So we're both preparing for that. I know I currently am pretty busy with the preview show, which will be the first thing that hits your screens, sort of previewing everything about the World Cup. And then Harry is sort of so deep in World Cup planning, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, not too much I can actually speak about, but there's a lot of very exciting plans on the way. You know, I think every audience that you're speaking to is different. A rugby audience is different to a football audience, is different to a cycling audience. I think the one thing we always have to bear in mind at ITV is you're not speaking to die-hard sports fans all the time. We're speaking to a mainstream audience. We're speaking to someone who might only watch 5 football games in a year or will only watch the Six Nations. So that definitely changes, the mindset around producing those events.
Yeah, and I think that permeates to the music as well, doesn't it? Because
For sure.
For each sport, it might have like a different sonic identity, which is kind of, I guess, more mainstream. You're not going for those niche audiences. You're going for, a wide plethora of society up and down the UK mainly. So whether that be leaning into kind of more chart music, which we do quite openly, or kind of, hit albums and things like that we can lean into and create that sort of resonance that people are familiar with, rather than throwing them into some random genre that they might be a bit offended by.
But also not being scared to do that sometimes.
Right,
I think if you've got something which is perfect and is out there that people might not have heard that you think is perfect for it, I think it's also trying to be brave and push the boundaries on things like that with music, for sure. So ITV and BBC will split the tournament 50-50. So, as soon as at ITV we know which games we're showing, I think everyone's thinking from then on, what could work in different shows.
Yeah, usually kind of these days, obviously with the women's game being so big as well for major international tournaments, there's usually one per year. So we work on a kind of yearly cyclical cycle of Euros, Women's World Cup, Men's World Cup, and that kind of turns around in a year. So we usually have a kind of year out of looking at the next tournament every summer usually. And then alongside that there's Rugby World Cups and other things, but with a large scale tournament, it's usually a year of kind of thinking about it, and then 6 months at the moment. Obviously we're a bit ahead of the World Cup. We've got teams already out in New York, kind of getting ready for that now, and kind of all the broadcast plans are done. Very logistically heavy. I suppose the creative would come in a bit later once all that's done and the infrastructure's ready, but usually it's once we kind of announce that we're doing it, it's start working it straight away.
Because the music drives everything. I think it's certainly something that I would be thinking about even years before. As soon as I know that we're showing, so we're showing the Women's Football World Cup next year in Brazil. So already you'll be thinking about samba inspired music and things like that. So for me, that's probably the most important thing. Always is, because anyone can watch a really nice VT. If the music's not very good, then people aren't going to like it, and if the music's amazing and the VT's not great, people will still like it. So the music for me is always the most important part of it.
And I think the identity really stays long in the memory. You think back to maybe tournaments that you remember from 10-15 years ago. You may not remember the VTs and kind of the programming, but you may remember a particular song, or particularly like the opening titles or openers and things like that, and that's why we spend a lot of time thinking about that identity around particular matches or the tournaments.
It's part of the story. Wherever the event is being held is always part of the story. So I think with this World Cup, especially, in so many different territories, I know we've been going through and we've been trying to get LA inspired music for the LA matches, New York inspired music for the New York matches, and so on. I think that's something that is always, it's also really fun to do, but it's something that an audience notice and enjoy, I think. So yeah, we see it as fairly important.
Music is similar to, I guess, visually, it's all about storytelling. So when we're trying to tell a story, whether that's a happy story or a sad story, we need to start with that musical identity and kind of work out what a particular song or theme or kind of just a vibe is saying about that, and not retroactively fit it. I know that you're keen as well on picking what that music is first and then sort of matching everything else to tell that, because ultimately you're going to feel something from the music, maybe not from the pictures, but then a bit of commentary or whatever, and that kind of will change, I guess, depending on whether that's an opener or a closer. Is it you going up, are you going down in the narrative?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, I mean, the main difference between a feature and an opener when it comes to prepping your music, for a feature, the one word I always say to all of our producers is space. You need to find a track that has space to let anything land, whether that's you're building up to a moment, if you're bringing it down from a moment, anything. That's the crucial part, is you need space to allow the pictures and the words to tell the story. Whereas an opener, you probably want a lot more edit points, and like you say, it's matching it to the moment.
I think when you approach projects for different outputs, so whether that's sort of vertical video or online, the musical approach needs to be different as well. A lot of people will be watching a vertical video through their phone, so listening through sort of tinny, treble heavy speakers. So we'll focus on music that is sort of higher in that treble range to kind of punch through. Anything bassy on a phone is not really going to work. Likewise on broadcast, when people already have good setups or better setups, then you can have a bit more range in kind of tonally music, and that's just kind of the base level of finding a track. I suppose with quicker turnaround edits on short form, music tends to be higher tempo, tends to be quicker. Again, like you said, more edit points when it comes to kind of telling that story. So yeah, things like that, kind of, there's like an endless possibility when it comes to selection of music tracks for different formats, and we try and kind of do the best we can with like the range that is available.
I think as well, a big change in the last few years is a lot of what we make for linear will make its way to YouTube, and if we've used a commercial track for linear, it's trying to find a production track that we can put onto YouTube as well. So that's a new thought process for a lot of our producers now, is if you're going to make a big England opener or feature which is going to get millions and millions of views, we don't want it to just be seen once and then forgotten about. So we want to put that onto YouTube. So now it's putting in people's mindsets to be thinking about production music as much as possible that can make its way onto YouTube and match the same VT. I think the one thing that I always find when I speak to anyone in a similar industry but different is how quick our turnaround times are. So certainly during the World Cup, you might be told the day before that you need to cut a piece that's going to go into an England game, which is going to have tens of millions of viewers, because of how quick, there's a game every day, and whether you're doing a 5-6 minute feature on something or an opening montage or a closer, it's the quick turnarounds, I think, which always surprise people.
Our technical team are incredible and probably go overlooked a lot of the time, but I think maybe a lot of people, because they can maybe do that on their phone or have access to it, might think that's quite easy, but the logistics of actually getting old football matches in from like say 1966 or whatever, we want a clip of that and then combining it, getting a voiceover, like the amount of work and technical sort of infrastructure that needs to come together to make that happen isn't just plugging a laptop in these days, it's the whole network behind us which supports what we do. So yeah, that goes overlooked all the time, and those guys are sort of instrumental in what we do as well. Yeah, I think when you're creating an identity, you need to have a range of options available to, if you find one good track, or you're creating a track from scratch, or you're using a commercial track or a library track, then you can't just rest on that. You need to have so many different versions. You need to have stings, you need to have bumpers, 10-second versions, 15 seconds bass only versions. That's one of the things that library music allows us to do. And when we use that, is kind of have all those different versions. So that's a big plus, but that might complement a particular musical style that we're going for. I know this World Cup will probably have you can imagine a kind of American, Mexican, Canadian style theme, that North American vibe, which is quite different really. It's kind of all the way from the deepest, darkest Mexico to the northern mountains of Canada. Canada, so it's quite broad. But just having those options available to not just repeat that music, because there's going to be 53 matches on ITV plus all the stuff we're doing online. That's a lot of time spent watching football and football content, and we can't just have one particular style or thing. We need to have multiple different outlets, but all kind of sound a little bit familiar. More recently, brands and companies really lean into musical identity and kind of that sonic identity. In the last 10 years, we've seen F1 compose their own musical theme. We've seen certain commercial tracks be attributed to competitions and the Olympics. I was doing some golf a while back where they completely reinvigorated their musical suite and used that for the whole tournament. The Masters does something similar. They have a theme tune. So I think that the tie-in between music and sort of sports especially is so strong now, and I think we're going to see more kind of bigger names coming in and being part of that journey where sort of music and sport align and kind of strengthen each other's property, I suppose, which is really super fun.